Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mike Ward. Welcome to our webinar today. This is specifically, I think, for our customers, users, and I think most people looking at the list are already using, in theory, Audit Manager. But what we're going to try and do today is something slightly different, which is to get our number one chief expert. There you go, I'm putting you under more pressure, Gary, sorry. And we're going to get Carrie to talk to you about how to implement SOD. Some of the big issues that you've got, perhaps, and I'm sure all of you won't have all of these issues, but show you specifically how to conquer these issues. So the majority of it is not going to be me chatting, you'll be pleased to know. It will actually be Carrie. I think most of you know who I am, so I won't dwell on that. Carrie, introduce yourself just in case one or two people haven't seen you before.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Carrie Curry. I am the Director of IT Security and Audit here at QSoftware. Been in the ERP space for quite a long time now, various different ERP systems, mainly JD Edwards, as business process system analyst. I have led a security team in a large public company, so very familiar with using QSoftware at a customer site and in internal, external audit scenarios. Here at QSoftware, I take care of some training, implementing. I call myself a security guru, which is vastly probably more accurate to say it's an audit guru, but I'm here to answer any questions and hopefully help take you through sort of more end-to-end on Audit Manager and give you a better look at some of the issues that we can help you resolve.
Thank you very much, Carrie. I'll hand back to you in a moment. So we're aiming to take about 45 minutes today, making this one a little bit longer because the last one we ran, people complained it wasn't long enough. That wasn't because you wanted to hear more of me, I'm sure. But if you've got any questions, just key them in. You should have the question box on your right-hand side, and I'll pick them up and pose them to Carrie as we're going along, or else you can reply to the email. And I'll cover those later on. If you want a copy of the slides, just send them to me, and we will we'll send them out to you. Manny says he can't hear anything. Carrie, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Manny, it's your end. I'm sorry. If you want to cover the slides, yep, just reach out to me at the end, or if you want a link to the recording, share with your colleagues. We'll also have that available to you. So let's get on. What are our objectives today? Our objectives basically are to try and explain to you or introduce to you or make it easier for you to set up SOD with Audit Manager. So these are the four areas that Carrie is going to cover: the basics, i.e. the configuration, etc., and how to get that through to the annual audit. Secondly is looking at accuracy and completeness in the SOD set. You will see very briefly, very shortly, that we have a considerable belief that starting small is a very, very good idea. Get 10 or 20 rules right and then go from there. Please don't take 200 rules from your auditor and start from there, because it's going to go wrong. Thirdly, we're going to have a look at operational use and annual audit. And fourthly, then proactive SOD, very important issue, i.e. checking SOD before you allocate a role to a user. So those are our objectives, and those are overall the issues that Carrie is going to cover with you. But let me, without any further ado, hand over to Carrie. She's the expert, and she's actually going to take you through this on the product and just talking. So Carrie, take it away.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mike. So I'm just going to get you to confirm you can see my screen.
I can.
Wonderful. All right, folks. So we're going to do this more. We've heard your feedback from our last session that more in product. So we're going to go through. I'm going to jump in, and I have a lot of information to share with you today. Hopefully, you don't get sick of hearing my voice by the end of these 45 minutes. But I really want to take you through sort of configuration all the way through to remediation, and as Mike mentioned, proactive SOD. So The very first piece that I want to start with is Audit Manager, the options that are available to you. And if you notice, this is release 535 of QSoftware. Each of these modules come with an options button. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes in there to talk about whether you're an existing customer and have never gone in here or have only been in here once, doing an upgrade or a fresh new install of QSoftware, any of those, go in and check out the options. Take 10 minutes, take a look at the options, see if there's anything you need to change. The options are what impacts sort of how Audit Manager is implemented on your system. So I'm going to go through the high-level basics on this, and then we'll jump into the SOD models. So Audit Manager options, there's a couple of tabs across the top here. The first is the SOD Setup tab. I'm not going to concentrate or deal with TAM today. TAM is True Access Model, and that's really about if you're in an all doors open security system, how you're reliant on menu filtering for some of your restrictions. Most of our customers, almost all of them, are in an all door closed security system. So if you do have questions on TAM, you can let us know after the fact. But we'll concentrate on you're in an all doors closed security system, and here's some options that are available in how you use Audit Manager. The SOD system constants, we're going to talk about these for a little bit. There's 4 options at the top, and this auditing button is new in 535. So we did do a QSoftware webinar short last week, little 10 minutes. You can, believe you can find it on our customer information page if you want to review how this works in more detail. But this is about auditing your audit rule set. So if you're using Audit Manager reports in an external audit, sometimes, most often, when they come back to audit you for the second time that year or the next year, they might ask you, has anything changed in your audit rule set? Enabling auditing will take before and afters of all of your rules, whether it's the rule headers, the duty details, etc. It's going to capture all of that information so you can provide that to an auditor and say, look, nothing has changed, or here's what has changed since the last time you were in. Along with that goes notes. Not a lot of people use notes in Audit Manager, and I'm going to show you once we're in there a little bit more about them. But you can have, I like to have one single note. You can add notes against models, rules, duties, etc. Auditing will tell you what has changed, but notes will tell you why something has changed. So I encourage you to take a look at your own installation and see if you're using the notes. Notes can print on various Audit Manager reports, and they're very handy in determining why something has changed in your rule set. I usually recommend using multiple notes. It's time and date stamped individual notes against rules or duties, etc. The next thing, most of you probably have this setting is use real-time security. If you're not using TAM, this is the default setting. Audit Manager is meant to scan your real live security tables. It's a point in time, so that setting likely is on for all of you. The last one in here that I wanted to talk about is validation restrictions, and I want you to go check this on your existing installation. Restrict to one level of violations. What that means is that a user can violate an SOD rule many different ways. They can have access to different objects. They can have add access, delete access, copy access. The methods and ways they can violate are numerous. If I have this restrict to one level of violations, it's going to stop and tell me you violated via this object in this application. I would go remediate it, rerun the report, and it would pop up with another way that I violated the rule. And then I would go through that iterative process. I recommend that you check all levels of violations. It's going to report to me all ways that a user can violate the SOD rules so I can sort of holistically deal with and remediate that user. I want to see all ways that you can modify address book, all ways that you can change vendors, etc. And then I can do the sort of a one-shot remediation. There is a note here about performance impact, and I will tell you that checking for all levels of violations up front is going to add more processing time to your reports, but you're going to save time on the back end because you're not having to rerun the reports every single time to sort of deal with one object, one security item at a time. So you're saving yourself on the back end, but you're increasing some of the processing time on the front end. So a little bit about the setup. The SOD admin tab, I'll quickly go through what these are. I get some questions on what are these and when would I use them? SOD system preferences, there's 2 options here. These are screens inside of Audit Manager, and these are the defaults when you go into the screens. More often or not, you want the environment to be JPD because that's what you're looking for access to production. I'll show you once we're in the Audit Manager a little bit more about where these are and what they mean. quick note about this work with violations form. If you're interactively in Audit Manager working with users or working with rules, you can choose to see the violations in a tree structure, or you can see them in a grid. And this is a newer feature. Either of these items you can come and turn on, turn off, and change as you get familiar with the product to see how you best work with it. But I'll point out where these settings are as we go through. Maintaining data dictionary overrides. So we have 13 different security types that you can design SOD rules with. And one of those is table level security. So I can look at row security. If you have a range of, let's say, a business unit, maybe a business unit's blank when you start out and you add it later, for example, you may have a business unit on a customer or on a employee, etc., that's blank. You want to allow QSoftware to look for that blank entry in the event that that's something that you want to look for in your rules. This is not changing J.D. Edwards data dictionary. All this is doing is allowing you to enter that blank star blank range when you're looking for table level details. If you need more information on this data dictionary overrides and you're having some trouble with getting the using table security and star blank ranges in your SOD rule design, which I'll get into in a little bit, you can reach out to us and we'll give you some more information on that. Maintaining max numbers, not something that people use very often, but I will tell you that if you're moving from, let's say, 9.1 to 9.2, and you want your validation IDs to start with a certain next number, you can do that. So every validation ID 5,000 and above, for example, was all done on a 9.2, provided that you're taking over the old information from 9.1 for QSoftware. That may be an instance where you're using next numbers, but it's not something that's sort of popular in terms of changing it. Role integrity report. In J.D. Edwards, you can have role sequences at a 0 sequence. And it doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. You will know if you have a role sequence at a 0, because when you install QSoftware and you start to use Audit Manager, there's a pop-up message that will appear and tell you to run this report. You can also just run this report ad hoc if you want to, but if you have a 0 role sequence number, it may impact your remediation and what you're trying to do with the violation details. So I encourage you to take a look, make sure there's no role sequences at 0. If there is, resequence them according to your sequencing strategy, so that when you're looking at your violation details, you can make a better sort of an assessment and analysis about remediation efforts. And finally, work with notes. As I mentioned, notes, they're very underutilized, but they will be very helpful for you when you're working with Audit Manager. Notes can be added to models, rules, duties, and profiles, and in here, it's just sort of a central application that you can look at all notes as you go through. The SOD reporting tab, I'm going to talk about a little bit more once we go through validation. The last thing I'm going to speak about on the options is the SOD reporting codes. Again, something that's really underutilized. If you have a need to segregate and organize your SOD rules or the violation details, so what I mean by that is I only want to look at rules that belong to Carrie. I only want to look at rules that are related to the procure to pay process. Procure to pay. I only want to look at rules that are for business people under violation details for business units, 100 and 200. You can do that with QSoftware. You have a reporting code admin here, and this is about how you set up the reporting codes. There's 5 reporting codes, and they're UDC values. You can make them whatever you want them to be. So this is division, and I have the divisions listed here. You can make them whatever you want. And this is going to help you. These are processing options when you're looking at doing a scan of SOD, when you're looking at the violation details. It's all ways that you can organize and categorize the way that you're running it and the way that you're looking at the output. They're vastly underutilized, and something that if you have that sort of requirement or you're struggling with how to make that work, reporting codes is likely someplace that you want to take a look at. You can maintain the reporting codes and see them all, assign them, change them, etc. in this application here. And one of the other things that we give you is the ability to load reporting codes from other places in J.D. Edwards. So you may have address book reporting codes, business unit category codes, etc. You can use those if they're going to be helpful for you, again, in the way that you validate SOD rules, in the categorization and organization of the violation details. This report would be helpful in terms of loading that data and using it over in QSoftware. If you feel that's something you're challenged with and you need help with organizing, categorizing, and how to do that, and you're thinking about using reporting codes, let us know, and we can help you work through sort of the best setup for you. So encourage you to go through the options on your installation when you first get started, etc. Take a look and make sure you're set up in terms of the way that you want to use Audit Manager at your site. Okay. Moving on, so that's the options section. We're going to go in and talk a little bit about SOD models and the setup of those. So I've created a test model for us to work with here today, because I have some examples I wanted to share with you. And I've called it webinar. All right. So I can have multiple SOD models, more than one. And people ask me, why would I want to do that? Sort of two instances. I usually recommend creating one SOD model for my SOD rules. So my 2 or 3-sided risk statements, okay? You know, we have many different rule types. I usually create a second SOD model for critical or sensitive access rules. So those are the one-sided rules. Tell me who has access to batch entry, for example. And the reason why I segregate those and make them two separate is because if I'm using this model in Security Manager Pro, and I'm also using it in User Admin Manager, I want to think about when you're doing a security change, I want you to be focused on the SOD violations, the violations of those risk statements. I don't necessarily want you to be concentrated on a full stop on whether somebody has access to batch entry or not. Similarly, over on the user provisioning side, if somebody just has a single risk rule violation, you're likely not to enter a mitigation, and it's a full stop over on the UAM side for that. So think about when you're setting up your models, 3 things I usually recommend. How many models do I need? Kind of sit down and think about, do I have Canada versus US different rule sets? Do I need to keep those separate? The rule types that I want to put in each one, and where they're going to be used at in other modules of QSoftware, by other different managers, etc. So it's something to think about when you're thinking about multiple models or one model. In terms of the model itself, you can have security defaults on the model, and this is something I wanted to point out. I recommend always checking for security type 3, which is, can I open and I run an application, and security type 1. Do you have add, change, delete, or copy access to that application? I do see some people that exclude security type 3 and they only look for security type 1. 2 points on that. First point is that this isn't about, you're not setting this up to tell you sort of, this is the applications we use here in my company and I'm just validating that nobody has access to them. I would challenge you to change your thinking. If you're being externally audited, you want to match what those external auditors are looking for. They're going to come in and look for security types 1 and 3. So think of your setup and audit manager as, what am I going to be externally audited on? And I'm going to closely match that, so that I can be ahead of and proactive about any violations before I get audited or more formally audited. So that's one point. The second point is, you don't want to go through a lot of analysis and remediation effort for somebody that can't even open the application to begin with. So ideally, you're looking for both of those, you're reporting both of those, and you're cleaning out both of those at the same time, rather than finding out later that you've left application security sitting out there in the workbench that just needs to be cleaned up. But totally bit of a different concept in terms of, I have a lot of people that are like, but we don't use that application here, so I'm not going to put it in my audit rule set, or we don't use that security type, so I'm not going to include it. It's not about you necessarily, it's about external audit and what they're checking for and making sure you're doing the same thing. 2 other points on the models. So models can be active or deactive. So if you decided to revise your audit rule set, you can deactivate the other one and leave it there and make a new one active. You can also lock and unlock a model. So if I'm the person that's responsible for administering it, perhaps I'm the one that, once I'm finished with it, I lock it. It stays locked until I have a request for a change to the model. Okay. So very important in terms of your models. All right. The next thing I want to do is go through the rules themselves. So I've set up a model. It's a container. It keeps all of my SOD rule information. The next thing that I need to consider is the SOD rules. We have 4 different rule types in QSoftware that is available for use. Object to object is our oldest rule type. So keep in mind that QSoftware is an evolution to get to 5.3.5, and JD Edwards 9.0 plus is also come a long way from green screens, etc. Object to object is one of our older, our first rule types that we have. What I recommend that people use this for today in 535 and JD Edwards 9.0 plus is very simplistic rules. Object to object, if you think about it, is a one-to-one comparison. I'm looking at this one application to this other application, comparing those two. It can also be a one-to-many. Okay, so if I just, third-party applications might be a really good candidate for this, but it's very simplistic. One-to-one, one-to-many, don't make it more complicated than that. I'm all about keeping your rules set, your SOD rule models and your rules very clear and simplistic. You have to consider that IT needs to use this to administer it potentially. Business needs to understand what they're being audited on and to help mitigate and remediate. Internal audit may be liaising between IT and external audit with these reports, and external audit may be reviewing these reports. So you have 4 or 5 different people in your organization that are all consuming this information. Clarity is key. Duty to duty is our most used SOD rule type, and that is truly about looking at many to many. So I may have many different ways that I can maintain the vendor master or affect change in the vendor master, which is typical in JD Edwards 9.0 and above. And the same thing with voucher entry. I have many different ways that I can enter a voucher. So if I want to look at compare many access to many applications to many other applications, duty to duty is the recommended approach to that. And a duty is just a container that contains all of the ways that you can execute that action or do that task. The next one is role to role. It's sort of our least used one, but in some cases, customers have a specific reason. So a role to role is a good rule type if you want to make sure that, let's say, anybody in an AB master role never gets an AP payment role. This will produce a report to tell you if those combinations of roles are on any users. So you may have some SOD rules around that. It's sort of a higher level of checking than duty to duty or object to object. Keeps it all at the role level, doesn't go down to object or security details. But if you have a need for it, you can just simply list the roles in there and compare and see who has them together. The last one, second most popular, is the single risk rules, and these are one-sided statements. It truly is just about tell me who has access to address book, who can modify address book information, and it lists all the applications in there that you may be able to modify address book with. If you're in violation, it just means that you have access to. Okay. So I'm going to go through and I wanted to show you talk a little bit about a rule header and why this information is important. It's not used as best as it could be in some installations. So a rule header is, I can have a rule type, and this is going to be selectable when I'm running my SOD scans later on. But the description when you're entering these needs to be very, very clear. And think about mapping the action to the risk. So is the risk created by entering, modifying, maintaining, approving, removing? Those actions are what you want to include in here along with the actual task. So I'm modifying the address book. The act of modifying is the risk. Entering vouchers, the entering is the risk. When I go create duties that are going to get attached to this rule, I'm going to name the duty the exact same thing. An important piece about clarity here, if you're sitting with the business and coming up with what's our SOD rule, make sure you're talking about the same thing. Somebody's saying, I'm going to put AP payments in here. We might need to ask, are you talking about manual payments and automated payments? Are we including those together, or do they need to be 2 separate duties? So make sure the language that you're talking, your understanding is the same when you're creating these. Justification code and text are underutilized. If you have an existing installation, think about the usage of these. This information appears on your audit manager reports. It is potentially going out to external audit. The person that's coming to audit you this time may not be the person that did that last time, and they may not be even somebody that's familiar with auditing JD Edwards. You want to use some of these fields and options available to you to cut down on the back and forth with external audit later on. So it's a UDC table, justification code. It can be anything you want it to be. So this rule, again, might be related to a specific process, a specific module, a specific rule owner. The other thing that is in here is justification text. And what I commonly use this for is putting in a control number. So if I have a control number from internal or external audit, I'll note the control number. It gets printed on the report. The person receiving the report can then identify, This is the control this report is related to, and here's my test procedures for that. The other one is severity, high, medium, low. Again, these can be anything you want them to be. You can modify the descriptions in here. It's the EDC table. You may want to run audit manager reports on critical SOD rules once a week. Put it on a scheduler over the weekend, come in on Monday, take a look, see if you have any violators on your critical rules. The low rules might be ones you want to check only twice a year. And we can create different versions of scans that have this information in it. So go through your rule headers and take a look and see if there's anything that you can update and change to help facilitate and make this process a little bit more efficient. Okay. All right, because duty to duty is the most used SOD rule, I want to go through. So we got some rule headers in there. The next sort of piece is adding the duties. Sorry about that. And I have some great tips for you in terms of the duties to make, we're talking about accuracy and completeness in terms of your SOD rule set. So a duty is a container, it's a bucket of applications and how you can execute that task in JD Edwards, okay? It's just a container and you go ahead and connect them, the different containers together to make rules. When I talk about duties, so I have a header detail. The header is very simplistic. And again, name it the same as the one side of your rule statement. You're going to fill up your container with applications. And this is, again, change your mindset a little bit. This isn't about, but I'm only using P01012 here. We don't use, Supplier Master, whatever it might be. Change your thinking to, this is what external audit is going to come in, and this is what they're going to look for in the organization. They're going to look for people who have access to this. Even if that access is not being used, it still creates a potential gap for fraud. Okay, so I want to set this up to be accurate and complete according to all the ways that somebody can execute that application or that access in my system. And people often ask me, where do I get this information from, right? A couple of different suggestions. If you search online, Oracle documentation for AP payments, Oracle has great documentation in terms of the applications, the tables it affects, the process, etc. It does involve more time for you to review all that information, but if you're struggling with one specific task or duty and getting the right applications in there, online Oracle documentation is a great spot. Your object librarian, F9860, you can query that table. If you look for things named journal or vendor, it'll come up with a listing of all applications in your system that have that word in it. And you can take that and sort of sit with the business and vet if those are the applications you need to include. Our sample rule set from QSoftware does have some of that information, so that's another great source of where to get these objects. But I will tell you that the sample set is truly just that. It's a sample set meant to give you a really great idea of how things can be set up. You really need to take that and customize it to your business. Super users, sitting with them and asking them to execute and modify the vendor master for you to take a look at as they're accessing the applications, what they're doing and what applications they're actually touching. It's another way. And if you're in an external audit engagement and having them help you with setting this up, they may be able to offer you some insight into what applications they'd like you to look for. Okay. So listing the application here, I want you to take note. You can list the application, form, UBE, table. I'm going to talk about processes in a second, but all of those are available for you to audit against. I'm going to talk about this version for a second here, because this is an important part about accuracy and completedness. If I put no version here, Audit Manager is going to go out and scan and look in the security workbench for anybody that has access to the base object only. Okay. If I list a specific version here, so let's say JD001, I'm telling Audit Manager to go out to the security workbench and look for only where a person has this object and this version. It's very literal, okay? The reason that we've created number sign any is that you can do both. You can look for both without having to type both of them into your duty. I'm telling the system by putting in this #any sign to tell me where somebody just has the base object or if somebody has the base object in any version, okay? This will add processing time to your validation, but what I want to say is that it will add processing time, but it will save you on the remediation effort in terms of seeing all ways and all access to the address book and then allowing you to do a one-shot remediation rather than having to keep going through over and over again. And keep in mind, if external audit is looking for any way that you can, any version of that application, you want to make sure you're looking for any version of that application as well. Quick note on the logical operator. You may have a need for 3 applications. I have to have access to all 3 to modify something, or all 3 applications to enter a record. You would use the AND logical operator here. I need this and this and this. More often than not in JD Edwards though, one application will allow you to do the action. One application allows me to modify, in which case I would use OR values. If you find yourself in a duty thinking about, maybe I want to add some ANDs and I want to add some ORs and I want to put them together in here, I would ask you to take a step back and think about creating 2 duties instead of 1. The reason being, you want to provide the most amount of visibility, the clearest, simplest setup when you print these reports so that people understand what you're looking for. When you start to complicate inside a duty or inside a rule with AND ORs together, it starts to get a little bit harder for people that are not familiar with QSoftware, especially on the external audit side, to understand. Okay, so you can take a step back and just create a second duty if you need to. All right, so I want to talk a little bit, next, security details. So I have rule headers, my 2-sided risk statement. I have duties, which are each side of the statement, little containers with all of my applications. The next piece is the security details. As I'm entering those applications, provided I have my security default set up, it's automatically putting this information in for me. So it saves me some time, right? We have 13 different security types that are available for you to design your rules with. And people are like, oh, geez, Carrie, why do you have 13 different types? Goodness, do I need that? Commonly, you're going to look for application and action security, yes. However, in JDE 9.0 and above, you have over 20 different security types. All of a sudden, you're in a situation where approvals are not done by action security. An approval, and I brought this up because I wanted to show you a good example here. In the batch application, an approval is done by an exit. It's not done by clicking the check mark. It's not done by hitting add, okay? Post by batch is also done by an exit. That's what's allowing the action to happen. If I'm trying to design rules where I'm mapping the action to the risk to the action and the action to the risk, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm capturing that over here. And that's why we've expanded to look for 13 different security types, okay? What you have set up in the duty, if you've entered an application, this is what's going to be available to you in terms of security to apply against it. Single risk rules, these 3 are only applicable to single risk rules. On the form side, so W001A, people will ask me, well, Carrie, how do I find, what form I need to add something on? If you go to the about information, it gives you the application and the form name is sitting there. These types of security apply to the form level. And this is where you're going to pick up some of those nuances, like exit security in the work with batches form, or image security. Okay, and I have a good example of that here. Adding a role or removing a role is done via an image. So therefore, we might want to capture that. If I just put in, tell me if Carrie has access to add or remove roles and put in application and action security, that's potentially a false positive. I might not have access to these images, which would not allow me to add and remove roles. So these extra security types and using them will help you make the rule more accurate and complete and your results more accurate and complete. Requires a little bit of running the reports, taking a look at the data, investigating, tweaking the rule design, along with some of that remediation. So it's an iterative process to sort of get to some of this more detailed information, but that's why there's so many there. If you have challenges about entering these and wondering why something's not popping up or I can't seem to get it to work as good as I want to or as easily as I want to, reach out to us and we can help you work through what your rule detail needs to look like. All right, Mike's favorite topic, false positives. I'm going to give you a really good, hopefully a really good breakdown of a false positive and what that looks like. So there's a couple of places, a couple of reasons why in JD Edwards, you may run a scan in Audit Manager and have some violations pop up where they're false, they're not true. A false positive is reporting that somebody has access when they don't have access to the application or they don't have access to that functionality. Okay. 2 places in JD Edwards where this occurs. Work with batches, you may have some false positives around approving and posting. The second place is around purchase order approvals. If you're using purchasing route coding, where somebody has to approve for somebody else based on a dollar amount, those are 2 places where you may find false positives in your SOD rule set. Okay, what I mean by that is I have a single risk rule that I want to report anybody who has access to approve and post batches. In that rule, I may be looking for the application, work with batches, P0011, tell me who can run it and who has add, change, and delete access. And by default, provided they're not blocked, I would have access to the approve and post batch here. I get that report and it tells me Carrie in her JD Edwards role does have the action security and can run it and does have the ability to access these exits. Okay, is Carrie in violation? Not necessarily, okay? The reason why. In JD Edwards, batch security is something elective. It's functionality that you can choose to turn on or off. It's not standard out of the box. It's something that you have to set up. Batch security lists specific people that can approve and post batches and who they can approve and post batches for. So here, Carrie, myself, I can approve for my own batches, approve and post my own batches. I can approve and post Lisa's batches, or I can approve and post everybody's batches, which by default means that I can approve and post my own batch. Star all means you can do for yourself, okay? This setting and this setup is not done through standard security. So I can't capture it by just looking for add, change, and delete access to an application. It's completely independent of security. So what I need to do, if I want to remove false positives and I want to make sure that is Carrie set up in this table, we've allowed you QSoftware to do that. I'm going to show you what that looks like in here. Very quickly, I set up a rule to show you. Actually, I want to show you the duty, sorry. So you need to tell QSoftware to go this extra step and look at this extra functionality, okay? And I have here, it's a duty. I put it in its own duty. And it's called a process. And it's called number sign BA. So if I want to look for somebody who can revise transactions, who can enter a batch, who can approve and post a batch, but can they do it for themselves, I need to tell QSoftware to use the star BA process. It's going to go out to the batch security table, F0024, and report back if Carrie can approve for herself or can approve for everybody. Adding this extra feature into your SOD rule set, if I am not set up in that table, I'll drop off the report as not being in violation. If I am in that table, it will report that I have access to all of those things. That's removing a false positive, okay? Happens on the PO. We have a number sign PO as well to use on the purchase approval side, okay? But fraud often occurs from somebody known to the organization with access to the entire process. Collusion, more than 2 people, happens less often. It's usually 1 person. Happens over a period of 18 months before it's actually caught. So you may want to go back for anywhere where you've had rules that are around approving and posting. Look to see if there's a higher risk where people can approve and post for themselves. If you feel that there's a higher risk in that, where somebody can really do more of the end-to-end process, check to see if you have batch security enabled in your company. If so, think about using this process where it'll go that extra mile and report if Carrie can do it for herself and take into account that extra functionality that's elective in JD Edwards. Okay. If you have any questions, yeah, go ahead.
Stop you a second. We've got a question here.
Sure.
Daniel, would using the cross-reference utility be another recommended way to derive the list of applications to build a duty profile?
Yes, absolutely. If you have access to XREF, you type in FastPath XREF. If you have access to that, that will tell you what applications call other applications, what tables are associated with an application. That is another excellent source of information, provided you have access to it, to help you build some of those duty details. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Okay. So if you have any questions about false positives, need some more information on that and help with your own installation, let me know. We can go through that. All right, so we've talked about our models, we've talked about our SOD rules, the details, etc. All right, the next thing I want you to think about is doing an integrity check on your SOD model. What the heck does that mean? That means that I want to make sure that that model is complete. You're not missing any duties. You have duties connected to rules. You have objects listed in the duties. You have security details assigned to them. You can do this interactively or via a PDF report. It will return the information to you and tell you that you have no errors. Please do this before you run a scan, especially if you made any changes. If this information is going out to external audit, do a quick integrity check, takes 1 second, and you'll understand if there's any issues in there. All right. In terms of doing an SOD validation, running a scan over your live security tables, 2 ways you can do that. You can do it via batch, which is here, run a validation. This is a summary report, and it will tell you if you have any violators, okay? And then once that report is finished, you would need to run this list current violations to get all the details, okay? And that report looks like this. So to give you the rule and the user, okay? Another way you can do this or get this information if you want to is rather than running by batch, you can do it individually by user or by rule, okay? I'm just gonna say no integrity check. Very quickly here, if you notice, there's my environment, single risk, I'm going to single user. This is the information that was in our options, in our work with preferences. Okay, SOD preferences, that's where this information is coming from. I can choose to work with an individual user in here. I may run a batch report and then start to look at individual users one by one in this method. So I can do that in here. And then I can also go ahead and add a mitigation from here as I work with individual users. More often or not though, when you run these reports for the very first time, or when you change your rule set, you might get a lot of information where the PDF is sort of not feasible. If you're using Hubble, reports now, any other reporting tool, a benefit of QSoftware is that we have our own table structure. All of the violation details exist in a table, and you can bring that into your reporting tool. In the absence of a reporting tool, you can use Data Browser to look at the violation detail table and take it out to Excel. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about remediation here in terms of phases before I wrap up. I know this is a lot of information, but if you need help with any of these items, just reach out afterwards. The way that I work remediation, especially on the first run, because the JD Edwards user ID sysadmin role is going to violate everything. It's expected that you get a lot of results from this, okay? I bring the violation details through my reporting tool and out sort of into Excel. You can keep them in your reporting tool too, but I have the user ID column where I can select and decide if I want to work on an individual user. I have the rule ID column, which I can select a very specific rule to work on if I wanted to. And then I also have the profile ID, and this is test data, so it would list a specific role. In this case, the access is coming from Star Public, but I can choose any of those features where I can start to look at. I can also do a pivot table in here too, which is helpful. But what I usually recommend, you can do it any way that sort of makes sense to you, but my recommendation is, if you're looking at remediation, start with business users first, IT users second, okay? Business users, I usually go through and look at the role specifically. So if there's one role that's causing violations, I want to just, never mind the users for a second, just look at the role itself. Inter-role conflicts can easily be remediated. I'm going to look at the role and it's going to tell me sort of if it has access, what access it has. I can then say for this role, do I want to remove security or make it view only? That's a very quick win if you start to work with this data. This role, make this view only, remove these applications, rerun the report, the users will drop off, and you can go to sort of the second phase, okay? Yes, users do come in violation via having multiple roles, but it's sort of a second phase, a second look at this. The very first look, try to just look at the role itself. We do have some interactive ways that you can look at a single role as well, which is really interested in that. I can just reach out and I can sort of tell you more about that. But a way to sort of look at the report, depending on what makes most sense for you. So phase one, look at the role specifically. Can I make any security changes first? Submit the security changes, rerun the report, see what we have left. Second phase, take a look at the remaining users, how they're in violation, and do I need to enter any mitigations? Do not enter in mitigations just to remove them from the report. Mitigations should be entered because there is a valid compensating control that you feel that is accurate, it's working, it will pass audit testing. So when you're entering your mitigations, make sure that you enter them, they're valid, right? So enter your mitigations, rerun the report again and see what we have left. Often what's left at the end of the day are going to be some of the things that require more time than just a quick security change. Things like changing a process, changing people, changing what department executes something, changing or creating new roles. That sort of remediation is going to take a little bit longer, but ideally you do the quick wins first and some of the more detailed or complex things at the end. And you get down to sort of the nitty gritty. But when you look at this report and take out the information and start to look at the different ways you can deal with your remediation, if you have any questions with this in terms of how do I plan this, or what's the best way that I can start to look at this or break this data down, reach out to us and let us know, and we can start to put together and help you put together a plan. But I wanted to bring this to your attention that you can absolutely look at it in this format and sort of make your plans around there. IT folks, just quickly, I usually say to do that a little bit later because that often involves a lot more work in terms of remediation. Things like creating an appropriate support strategy that's compliant in terms of users that are supporting the business. You may need to incorporate a testing strategy for security changes, and often those users have more complex compensating controls in terms of monitoring. Those ones I would deal with sort of separate than business users, okay? As you start to work that an iterative process and get those items remediated, it then becomes much more manageable to look at the violations in the PDF report or to start to look at them through this work with user or work by rule, because then you're likely only dealing with a handful, which is much more easier to sort of work through. All right. The last part I wanted to talk to you about, and I appreciate that you've all hung in there for this long, is proactive SOD. So your audit manager reports, when you're running them like this in batch, you can get to a point, and your goal should be to get to a point where this is running clean, okay? Audit manager shouldn't be just something that you run these reports once a year or twice a year before audit comes in or at audit time. This should be something you set up on a scheduler and you're looking at weekly, monthly, quarterly, for example. Fraud doesn't occur sort of one time in the year, or nor should you want to catch it once a year. You can set these up on the scheduler and let them run and come in on a Monday and look and see, you know, I got no violations. But the key to that is being proactive in two areas, okay? This will run clean once you do the initial remediation because of two pieces. One, in security management, in that process, you're using and proactively checking for those same SOD rules in Security Manager Pro. Okay, there's my SOD model over here. And provided, you know, you'd have the same model you can use throughout. This is test and demo data, but you're proactively checking for SOD and you're not introducing SOD violations into the security workbench. That's the first part. The second part is on the user provisioning side. You're not introducing SOD violations by putting two users on a role. If I come into here, I can see a user admin manager that I'm also using an SOD model in here. Security Manager Pro, Audit Manager, and User Admin Manager should all be using the same SOD model, all mitigating against the same SOD model. And if you're doing that as part of your processes, you're using sort of all of our tools together, this Audit Manager report will get to a point where you're seeing this as no regularly. And that's what you're heading into an audit with. Okay, and that truly is the difference between sort of operationally using your SOD model, security changes, user provisioning, versus I'm going to use Audit Manager going into an external audit. That's the difference, is you can go into it clean, provided that you're operationally using the other pieces. All right, and that is all I wanted to share with you today. There is much more to Audit Manager in terms of things to learn, etc. But I wanted to really give you sort of options all the way to remediation and proactiveness today in sort of a 60-minute format. So I'll check in with Mike to see if we have any questions.
Not right now. Folks, if you got any questions, just key them into the question box and we'll pick those up in a minute. Thank you, Carrie. That was fantastic. Can you see my full screen?
Yes, you can.
Okay, I just want to wrap this up a couple of minutes, folks. The one thing that Carrie raised that I think was very interesting is that these controls all link into each other using an SOD model, and that is in the user provisioning as well as in the segregation of duties checking and audit reporting, and makes the whole system work a lot better, keeps your security clean. Takes a little bit more investment and effort to get all these controls in place, but what you're trying to achieve is sustainability, i.e. controls that will last, so you don't have to panic the month before audit come in, and you don't have to lay awake wondering whether you're going to get fraud. Question coming in, can I get a copy of the deck? Yes, you can. I will sort that out immediately afterwards. Anybody wants a copy of the deck, just send me a message, or you can reply to the email you got reminding you about this session before about an hour and a half ago. So we now have products which map onto each of these stages. If you want to look at periodic review, the annual process that or quarterly process to sign off access, it's how you involve the business, fraud detector, which is the continuous monitoring, etc. All right, we've got sessions coming up on all of those tools. I also wanted to just remind people of our Q Cloud tool. It's particularly useful for looking at your Oracle licensing. We sell this as a service, so you can check it once, twice a year and make sure that you're within your Oracle license. But some people use this to give it to the audit team so that they're independent of IT, and the audit team can then run this whenever they like to have a look at the overall SOD issues and to get their reports out. Carrie, just I don't know how much of this you want to cover. That's the overall objectives we set ourselves out. Anything you want to pick out of here as a summary?
Yeah, I'll just a high level the summary. From configuration to annual audit, understand the basics. Simple, clear, visually simple. Set up your SOD model so it's not complicated, okay? That's going to be key. Ensuring your accuracy and completeness, it will take you a little bit of time to get there, but put something in, start running it, and then start doing an iterative process of tweaking it as you go. Operational versus annual audit is going to be key in terms of fraud doesn't occur at one time. You shouldn't be able to just look at it once a year. Understand how you can use Audit Manager or all of the QSoftware modules on an operational basis to keep you clean and heading into your audits. If you're having challenges with that, let us know and we can help put together sort of a better operational versus annual process for you. And then how proactive SOD ensures year-round compliancy. If you don't have those other tools, take a look at them because whether you're doing all of this upfront using some of the proactive pieces, if you're not using it upfront, you're paying for it on the back end. You're going to find it, PwC is going to find it in some audit violations, and then you'll have to do a lot of remediation and deal with recommendations after the fact when you absolutely could have dealt with it upfront and been proactive about it.
Thank you, Carrie. We are offering folks a free half an hour of Carrie's time if you want to follow up on any of this with your specific issues. That would be free of charge. We're investing this time. We all felt that while we're in lockdown, we would have time on our hands and we would help our customers. As it's turned out, we're all saying earlier on, we're busier than we've ever been in our lives. But there you go. We've got a number of other sessions coming up. The next customer webinar is on periodic review, if you want to look at that. User certification, some people call it. We also have a webinar short coming up on the 21st, which is next Thursday. That's on Udo security. Our man Owen Pay will be talking about Udo security, so put yourself in for that. Sessions coming up on audit as well and user provisioning. All the events are there on the events page on our website, qsoftware.com/events. Have a look. And the customer page is there at the top, customer-info-JDE-E1. That's specific to our customers, just information about all the events and webinars and specifically some recordings as well. Our YouTube channel is something we're just putting quite a bit of effort into, short educational videos mainly, and demo system of all the products and how they're used, etc. But we're trying to keep those to short ones. So that's about it for today. Let me just check the inbox. No further questions at the moment. No. Well, if you've got questions, I think, bluntly speaking, Kerry, that was fantastic. I think you covered an enormous amount of ground, and I think most people will have done well to capture most of that. But just email me with any questions you've got outstanding. There's my email address, or if you want to copy the slides, you can mail me. Or as I said, you'll get through to me if you reply to the reminder you'd have got an hour and a half ago. We have recorded the session, so we can also give you a recording of that. Great stuff, Kerry. Again, I think our customer base will have enjoyed that enormously. But that's all for today, folks. Overran by 5 minutes. Sorry about that, but I think it was worth it. Enjoy the rest of your day. Hope that was useful. Cheers.